My name is Ashley Thompson. I'm 34 years old, and I need to tell you about the worst moment of my life as a mother. During a family vacation at my parents' lake house, I came across my son with his head shaved completely bald, and when I demanded to know what happened, my Uncle Frank just laughed and said, "It's a prank, relax." Like humiliating my child was the funniest thing in the world. Have you ever trusted someone in your family so much that you never imagined they could hurt your child? I want you to think about that for a moment, because what I'm about to share with you will make you question everything you know about family loyalty. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you loved, hit that like button right now and subscribe to this channel, because you're going to want to hear how this unfolds and what I did to fight back. It was supposed to be the perfect summer vacation. My son, Oliver, who was only 8 years old at the time, had been so excited about spending 2 weeks at my parents' lake house. He talked about it for months, asking me every single day when we were leaving. My Uncle Frank, my mom's brother, was going to be there too, and Oliver absolutely adored him. Frank was the fun uncle, the one who always brought gifts, told jokes, and made everyone laugh at family gatherings. I never had a single reason to doubt his intentions or question his judgment around my child. Looking back now, I realize how blind I was to the red flags that were always there. The first few days of the vacation were exactly what we needed. Oliver spent his mornings fishing with his grandfather, his afternoons swimming in the lake, and his evenings roasting marshmallows by the fire. I watched him laugh and play with such pure joy that it made my heart feel full. My Uncle Frank was his usual cheerful self, always cracking jokes and organizing games for the kids. Everyone seemed relaxed and happy, and I remember thinking how grateful I was to have such a close-knit family. I even told my sister how lucky we were that our kids could grow up surrounded by so much love and support. But underneath all that laughter and those warm moments, something dark was brewing, and I had no idea what was coming. On the 5th day of our vacation, I noticed that Oliver and Uncle Frank were spending more time together than usual. They would disappear for hours, and when I asked where they went, Frank would just wink and say they were working on a secret project. Oliver seemed happy, maybe a little quieter than normal, but I didn't think much of it. I trusted Frank completely, and I thought it was sweet that they were bonding. My mom even commented on how wonderful it was that Frank was taking such an interest in Oliver's life. I smiled and agreed, never imagining that my uncle was using that trust to do something that would devastate my son and shatter my faith in my own family forever. That night, as I tucked Oliver into bed, he looked at me with these big, innocent eyes and said, "Mom, Uncle Frank says that real men are brave and can take a joke." I laughed it off, kissed his forehead, and told him that being brave means being kind and standing up for what's right. I had no idea that those words from Frank were already planting seeds of manipulation in my son's mind. I had no idea that the next morning would change everything, that I would see something so shocking that it would make me question every single relationship in my life. But that's when things took a turn I never saw coming, and nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning started like any other vacation day, with the smell of coffee and bacon filling the lake house. I woke up feeling refreshed, looking forward to another day of watching Oliver enjoy his childhood in the most beautiful setting. But when I walked into the kitchen and saw my son sitting at the table, my heart dropped into my stomach. Oliver's beautiful blonde hair, the hair I had carefully grown and styled for years, was completely gone. His head was shaved down to the skin, and he looked so small, so vulnerable, so different that I almost didn't recognize him. If you've ever experienced that moment when your brain can't process what your eyes are seeing, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because what happens next will shock you even more. I stood there frozen, my coffee mug slipping from my hand and shattering on the floor. Oliver looked up at me with tears streaming down his face, and I could see the shame and confusion in his eyes. Before I could say anything, before I could run to him and hold him, I heard laughter coming from the living room. It was Uncle Frank, laughing so hard he was slapping his knee, like this was the funniest thing he had ever witnessed. My mom and dad were standing there looking uncomfortable, but they weren't saying anything to stop him. My sister avoided my eyes completely, and I realized in that horrifying moment that everyone knew what had happened, and nobody had thought to wake me up or stop it. "What did you do to my son?" I finally managed to say, my voice shaking with a mixture of shock and rage. Frank wiped tears of laughter from his eyes and said, "Oh, come on, Ashley. It's just a prank. The kid needed to toughen up anyway. Look at him. He looks like a little soldier now." He said it so casually, like he had just taken Oliver to get ice cream instead of shaving his head without my permission. Oliver started crying harder, and I could see that he felt humiliated, not just by what happened, but by the fact that this man he trusted was now laughing at his pain. That's when something inside me broke, and I knew that this wasn't just about hair that would grow back. I walked over to Oliver and wrapped my arms around him, feeling his small body shake with sobs against my chest. "Uncle Frank said it would be fun," Oliver whispered. "He said we'd surprise you and that you'd think it was cool. But when I saw myself in the mirror, Mom, I didn't look like me anymore." My heart shattered into a million pieces as I listened to my 8-year-old son describe how he had been manipulated and betrayed by an adult he trusted. Frank had taken him into the bathroom early that morning, convinced him it would be an adventure, and shaved his head while the rest of the family was either asleep or too afraid to intervene. The worst part was that Oliver blamed himself, thinking he should have been braver or that he had let me down by crying. As I held my son and felt his tears soaking through my shirt, I looked around the room at my family members who were now pretending to be busy with breakfast or suddenly very interested in their phones. Not one of them was willing to meet my eyes or stand up for what was right. Frank had stopped laughing but was still smiling, clearly expecting me to eventually calm down and accept his version of reality, where this was all just harmless fun. But I wasn't going to calm down, and I wasn't going to let this go. Something fundamental had shifted in that moment, and I knew that what happened next would either define me as the mother who protected her child at all costs, or the one who stayed silent to keep the peace. You won't believe what I did next, and neither did my family. "Ashley, you're overreacting," Frank said with a dismissive wave of his hand, his smile fading into irritation. "It's just hair, for God's sake. It'll grow back in a few months. Boys get haircuts all the time, and you're acting like I committed some kind of crime." The way he said it, with such confidence and casualness, made me feel like I was the crazy one for being upset. Have you ever been in a situation where someone hurts you or your loved one, and then makes you feel guilty for having a normal reaction? If you have, please hit that like button and subscribe, because this channel is about exposing these toxic patterns and showing you that you're not alone in fighting back against manipulation. My mother stepped forward and put her hand on my shoulder, her voice soft and pleading. "Honey, I know you're upset, but Frank didn't mean any harm. He was just trying to bond with Oliver, and maybe he went a bit too far, but we're family. Let's not make this into a bigger deal than it needs to be." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own mother was asking me to minimize what had just happened, to pretend that an adult man shaving a child's head without parental consent was somehow acceptable behavior. My dad stood silently in the corner, looking uncomfortable but clearly unwilling to contradict his brother-in-law. My sister finally spoke up, saying, "Kids are resilient, Ash. Oliver will forget about this in a week." But when I looked at my son's face, I knew he would never forget this moment. This is when I realized something crucial about toxic family dynamics that I want you to understand. When abuse happens within families, there's this unspoken pressure to minimize it, to sweep it under the rug, to prioritize keeping the peace over protecting the victim. Everyone becomes complicit in the abuse by refusing to call it what it is. They use words like prank, joke, bonding, or toughening up to disguise what is actually a violation of boundaries and trust. Frank didn't ask for my permission because he knew I would say no, so he manipulated my son instead. And now my family was asking me to accept this manipulation because admitting it was wrong would force them to confront an uncomfortable truth about someone they love. "Let me make something very clear," I said, my voice steady despite the rage boiling inside me. "What Frank did was not a prank. A prank is something everyone can laugh about afterward, including the person it happened to. Does my son look like he's laughing?" I pointed to Oliver, who was still crying in the chair, his hands covering his face. Frank took advantage of a child's trust, manipulated him into doing something he clearly didn't want to do based on Oliver's reaction, and did all of this behind my back because he knew it was wrong. That's not bonding. That's not a joke, and I will not pretend otherwise just to make the rest of you feel comfortable. The room went completely silent, and I could see the shock on everyone's faces. They had expected me to eventually calm down and fall in line like I always did, but something had fundamentally changed in me. Frank's face turned red, and for the first time, I saw anger flash in his eyes instead of amusement. "You're being ridiculous, Ashley. You're going to ruin this entire vacation and turn the family against each other over a haircut? What kind of mother teaches her son to be so sensitive and weak? I was trying to help the boy become a man, and you're treating me like some kind of monster." That statement right there revealed everything I needed to know. He wasn't apologizing, he wasn't showing remorse, and he wasn't concerned about Oliver's feelings. Instead, he was attacking me, questioning my parenting, and trying to make himself the victim of my overreaction. But I wasn't falling for it anymore, and what I decided to do next would shock everyone in that room, including myself. The real battle was just beginning, and I was about to show my family what happens when you mess with a mother's child. I need to pause here and talk about something that many of you might recognize in your own families. Toxic family dynamics don't usually involve obvious villains and heroes. Instead, they're built on years of learned behaviors, unspoken rules, and a collective agreement to avoid conflict at all costs, even when that conflict is necessary. In my family, Uncle Frank had always been given a pass for his inappropriate behavior because he was just being Frank, or that's just his sense of humor. Over the years, I had watched him make uncomfortable jokes, cross boundaries, and then laugh it off when people got upset. And every single time, the family had rallied around him, asking the hurt person to be more understanding, more forgiving, more flexible. If you're watching this and thinking about someone in your own family who gets away with bad behavior, because that's just how they are, please subscribe and turn on notifications because we're going to dive deep into how to break these toxic patterns. Looking back at my childhood and early adulthood, I could now see a clear pattern that I had been blind to before. When I was 16, Frank made an inappropriate comment about my body at a family dinner, and when I got upset, my mom told me he was just trying to compliment me and that I was being too sensitive. When my sister's husband confronted Frank about borrowing money and never paying it back, Frank turned it around and accused him of being greedy and ruining Thanksgiving over a few bucks. When my cousin's daughter said she didn't want to hug Frank because he squeezed too hard, her mother forced her to hug him anyway, while Frank laughed and said kids today had no manners. The pattern was always the same. Frank did something that hurt or violated someone. The victim expressed their hurt, and the family pressured the victim to minimize their feelings to protect Frank's ego and the family's false sense of harmony. The most dangerous part of this dynamic is that it trains victims to doubt their own perceptions and feelings. I had spent years wondering if I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too rigid in my expectations of how people should behave. Every time Frank did something that made me uncomfortable and the family told me to let it go, I internalized the message that my feelings didn't matter as much as family peace. This is called gaslighting, and it's one of the most insidious forms of psychological manipulation because it makes you question your own reality. Standing in that kitchen, watching my son cry while my family minimized his pain, I suddenly saw the entire system clearly for the first time. They weren't asking me to forgive one mistake. They were asking me to continue participating in a toxic system that protected abusers and silenced victims. And I finally understood that if I gave in now, I would be teaching Oliver that same terrible lesson. I need everyone to listen to me very carefully, I said, pulling Oliver close to me. What Frank did to my son was not harmless, and I'm not going to pretend it was. This isn't about hair growing back or Oliver being resilient. This is about an adult manipulating a child, violating his bodily autonomy, and causing him emotional distress for his own amusement. If any stranger had done this to Oliver, you would all be outraged and calling the police. But because it's Frank, because he's family, you expect me to just accept it and move on. I won't do that anymore. I'm done protecting people who hurt my child just because they share my DNA. You could have heard a pin drop in that room. My mother looked like I had slapped her. My dad's face was bright red, and Frank's expression had shifted from anger to something that looked almost like fear. He was finally realizing that his usual tactics weren't working, and that I wasn't going to back down. My sister broke the silence by saying, "So what are you going to do, Ashley? Cut us all off over this? Deprive Oliver of his grandparents, his aunt, his entire family because of one incident?" Her words were meant to guilt me, to make me feel like I was the one tearing the family apart rather than holding the person accountable who had actually caused the harm. This is another classic tactic in toxic family systems. The person who speaks up about abuse is accused of being divisive, while the actual abuser is protected. But I had clarity now that I'd never had before, and I knew exactly what I needed to do. I looked at my sister and said, "I'm going to do whatever it takes to protect my son, even if that means standing alone against all of you. And if you see that as me being divisive rather than Frank being abusive, then that tells me everything I need to know about where your loyalties lie." What happened next would test every relationship I had, but I was ready for that battle because I had finally found my voice. I want to be completely honest with you about what happened in the hours after that confrontation. While everyone else went about their day pretending nothing had happened, I locked myself and Oliver in our bedroom and just held him while he cried. Part of me wanted to pack our bags immediately and leave, to cut ties with everyone who had failed to protect my son. But another part of me, the part that had been trained my entire life to value family above everything else, was screaming at me that I was overreacting. I kept hearing my mother's voice in my head saying, "We're family," and my sister's words about depriving Oliver of his grandparents. Have you ever been torn between doing what you know is right and keeping the peace with people you love? If you're struggling with that right now, please hit subscribe and like this video because I'm going to show you how I found the strength to choose my child over everything else, and you can too. The guilt was overwhelming. and I want you to understand just how powerful family conditioning can be. I started questioning myself in ways that seem crazy to me now. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it really was just hair and I was making it into something bigger than it needed to be. Maybe I was being too protective and Frank really was just trying to bond with Oliver in his own weird way. Maybe I was the problem for not being able to take a joke. These thoughts went through my mind even though I was literally holding my traumatized child who was still shaking from what had happened. That's how deep the programming goes when you've spent your entire life in a family system that teaches you to doubt yourself and prioritize the feelings of others over your own instincts. I felt like I was going crazy, split between two versions of reality. Oliver finally stopped crying and looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. "Mom, am I in trouble?" he asked in a small voice. "Uncle Frank said that if I told you I didn't want to do it, you'd be mad at both of us for ruining the surprise. He said you'd think I was being a baby." My heart broke all over again hearing those words. Frank hadn't just violated my son's body by shaving his head without permission. He had also manipulated Oliver into believing that he would be in trouble for speaking up, that expressing his discomfort would make him weak, and that his own mother wouldn't believe or support him. This is grooming behavior, plain and simple, and it made me physically sick to realize that it had happened right under my nose while I was sleeping just down the hall. I pulled Oliver close and said, "Baby, you are not in trouble. You will never be in trouble for telling me the truth about how you feel. Uncle Frank lied to you. He knew what he was doing was wrong, and that's why he did it in secret and told you not to tell me you were uncomfortable. Adults who do the right thing don't need to tell children to keep secrets from their parents." As I said those words out loud, I realized I was also talking to myself, reminding myself of the truth that my family was trying to obscure. Frank knew it was wrong. That's why he did it early in the morning. That's why he manipulated an 8-year-old instead of asking me. That's why he immediately called it a prank when he got caught, trying to reframe his actions before I could define them as what they really were, a violation. But even with that clarity, I still felt the pull of family loyalty trying to drag me back into silence. My phone kept buzzing with text messages from my mother begging me to come out of the room and talk things through. My sister sent a long message about how I was ruining everyone's vacation and making Oliver feel worse by making such a big deal out of nothing. Even my dad, who rarely got involved in family drama, sent a text saying that Frank was willing to apologize if I would just calm down and be reasonable. Every message was designed to make me feel like the problem, like my reaction was the issue rather than Frank's actions. I sat there on that bed, holding my son, with my phone buzzing constantly, and I had to make a choice. Was I going to teach Oliver that keeping the peace is more important than protecting yourself? Or was I going to show him what it looks like when someone stands up for what's right, no matter the cost? That choice would define both of our futures, and what I decided in that moment would shock everyone, including myself. The turning point came when Oliver got up to use the bathroom and I saw his reflection in the mirror as he passed by. He immediately looked away from himself, his shoulders slumping, his whole body language screaming shame and discomfort. My 8-year-old son couldn't even look at his own reflection without feeling humiliated. That image burned itself into my brain, and suddenly all the doubt and guilt I had been feeling evaporated. I didn't care anymore about keeping the peace or maintaining family harmony, or being seen as reasonable. My son had been hurt, and the people who should have protected him had either caused that hurt or enabled it. In that crystal clear moment, I knew exactly what I needed to do, and I knew there was no going back from it. I called my best friend Rachel, who lived 3 hours away, and told her everything that had happened. Rachel had always been honest with me, sometimes brutally so, and I needed to hear from someone outside my family whether I was actually losing my mind or if my instincts were right. "Ashley, listen to me very carefully," Rachel said, her voice firm. "What Frank did is called assault. He physically altered your child's appearance without your consent, and against Oliver's will based on what you're telling me. The fact that he used manipulation and coercion makes it even worse. This isn't a gray area, and anyone telling you otherwise is gaslighting you. You need to get Oliver out of that house right now and decide if you want to involve the authorities." Hearing someone validate my reality after hours of being told I was wrong gave me the strength I didn't know I needed. After I hung up with Rachel, I sat Oliver down and had a conversation with him that no parent should have to have. I asked him to tell me exactly what happened that morning, step by step, and to be completely honest even if he thought it might upset me. Oliver told me that Uncle Frank had woken him up early and said they were going to do something special and fun. He took Oliver into the bathroom and told him that getting his head shaved would make him look tough and cool, like the soldiers Frank had served with in the military. Oliver said he felt uncomfortable and asked if they should wait to ask me first. But Frank said it was a surprise and that I would love it. When Frank started using the clippers, Oliver said he wanted to stop, but Frank told him it was too late and that he needed to be brave and sit still like a man. By the time it was over, Oliver looked in the mirror and started crying, and that's when Frank got angry and told him to stop being a baby. Listening to my son describe his experience, I felt rage unlike anything I'd ever experienced in my life. This wasn't a prank gone wrong or a misunderstanding or a bonding attempt that backfired. This was a calculated act by an adult who manipulated a child, ignored his protests, shamed him for his emotional response, and then tried to cover it all up by framing it as a joke. Frank had crossed every possible boundary, and he had done it deliberately. The fact that my family was defending him and pressuring me to let it go made me realize that I couldn't trust any of them to prioritize Oliver's well-being over their own comfort. I was on my own in this fight, but I was ready to stand alone if that's what it took. I made my decision, and I knew it would change everything. I packed all of our belongings as quickly as I could while Oliver sat on the bed watching me with wide eyes. "Are we leaving, Mom?" he asked. "Yes, baby, we're leaving right now," I told him. "And I want you to know that what happened to you was not okay. It will never be okay. And I'm going to make sure Uncle Frank understands that there are consequences for hurting people, even when those people are children, and even when the person who hurts them is family." I could see relief wash over Oliver's face, and I realized that he had been waiting for me to protect him, to choose him, to show him that his feelings mattered more than adult egos and family politics. I wasn't going to let him down. I picked up our bags, took my son's hand, and prepared to walk out of that bedroom and face my family one final time before leaving that house forever. What I said to them in those final moments would leave them speechless, and what I did in the days that followed would tear my family apart. But I didn't care anymore, because I had finally found my voice, and I was ready to use it. I walked out of that bedroom carrying our bags with Oliver right beside me, and I felt a strength I didn't know I possessed. My family was gathered in the living room, clearly waiting for me to emerge so they could continue pressuring me to drop the issue and apologize for overreacting. Uncle Frank was sitting on the couch with his arms crossed, looking annoyed rather than remorseful, like I was inconveniencing him with my anger. My mother jumped up immediately and said, "Ashley, thank God you're out here. We've all been talking, and we think if Frank apologizes and maybe gives Oliver some money for new video games, we can put this behind us and enjoy the rest of our vacation." I stood there looking at all of them, these people I had loved and trusted my entire life, and I realized they would never understand what they were asking me to accept. Have you ever had to stand up to your entire family to protect what's right? If you have, or if you're facing that choice right now, please subscribe and hit that like button, because this moment right here is when everything changed, and I want you to see that you can find this courage too. I set our bags down by the door and walked into the center of the living room so I could look at all of them at once. "I'm not interested in an apology that comes because you all pressured him into it," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm not interested in video games or money or any other attempt to buy my silence and Oliver's compliance. What I'm interested in is Frank admitting that what he did was wrong, that he manipulated and violated my child, and that he understands there will be real consequences for his actions." Frank actually laughed at that, a short, bitter sound that made my skin crawl. "Consequences? What are you going to do, Ashley? Ground me. I'm a 58-year-old man, and you're acting like I committed some kind of crime. I already said I'm willing to apologize if it'll make you happy, but I'm not going to sit here and be lectured by someone who's clearly lost all sense of perspective." That response told me everything I needed to know. Frank wasn't sorry for what he had done. He was only sorry that I wasn't playing along with the family script, where he got to do whatever he wanted, and everyone else had to accept it. "You're right about one thing, Frank," I said. "You're a 58-year-old man, which makes what you did even more disgusting. You're an adult who manipulated a child, who ignored his protests, who shaved his head against his will, and who then mocked him for being upset about it. You used your age and authority to make my son feel like he had no choice but to comply with something that violated his bodily autonomy. And now you're sitting here acting like you're the victim because I'm holding you accountable." I could see his face turning red, his jaw clenching, and I knew I had struck a nerve by refusing to back down the way everyone expected me to. "I've had enough of this," Frank said, standing up from the couch. "You're being dramatic and ridiculous, and you're teaching your son to be weak and oversensitive. In my day, boys didn't cry over haircuts, and parents didn't coddle them like this. I was trying to help Oliver become tougher, and instead, you're turning him into a victim and making me out to be some kind of monster. If you can't handle a simple prank without having a meltdown, maybe the problem isn't me. Maybe the problem is that you're raising your son to be soft and you can't handle anyone suggesting there might be a better way." His words were designed to hurt me, to make me doubt myself, to push all the buttons that had worked on me my entire life. But something had shifted in me, and his manipulation tactics no longer had any power. Get out of my way, I said quietly, picking up our bags again. Oliver and I are leaving, and I don't want to hear another word from any of you. My mother grabbed my arm, tears streaming down her face, begging me not to leave like this, saying we could work it out if I would just calm down and be reasonable. My sister blocked the door, telling me I was being selfish and destroying the family over nothing. My dad stood there silently, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to take a side, and Frank just stood there with that smug look on his face, confident that I would eventually back down like I always did. But I looked him dead in the eye and said, "What you did to my son was assault, and if you think I'm going to let this go, you're about to learn just how wrong you are. You're going to regret the day you decided my child was acceptable collateral damage for your sick sense of humor." The shock on his face was priceless, and I pushed past my sister, took Oliver's hand, and walked out that door without looking back. The real battle was just beginning, but I had finally drawn my line in the sand, and I was prepared to go to war. The 3-hour drive home was mostly silent, with Oliver sleeping in the back seat and me gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My phone was exploding with calls and text messages from my family, ranging from my mother's tearful voicemails begging me to come back, to my sister's angry texts calling me selfish and dramatic, to Frank's message saying I had embarrassed him in front of the family and I owed him an apology. I turned my phone on silent and focused on driving, but my mind was racing with questions about what I should do next. Part of me wanted to just go home, lock the doors, and try to help Oliver heal from this trauma in private. But another part of me, the part that was becoming stronger with every mile I drove away from that lake house, knew that silence would only protect Frank and enable him to do this to someone else. When we got home, I tucked Oliver into his own bed and sat with him until he fell asleep, exhausted from crying and the emotional trauma of the day. Then I went downstairs, made myself a cup of tea, and did something I never thought I would do. I called the non-emergency police line and asked to speak to someone about filing a report. My hands were shaking as I waited on hold, and I kept having thoughts like, they're going to think I'm crazy, and this is too extreme, and I'm really going to involve the police against my own family. But then I thought about Oliver's face when he couldn't look at himself in the mirror, and I thought about Frank's complete lack of remorse, and I knew I had to follow through. A kind officer named Detective Sarah Martinez answered, and listened patiently as I explained what had happened. And when I finished, she said something that changed everything. "Ma'am, what you're describing is a potential case of assault on a minor and child endangerment," Detective Martinez said. "When an adult uses manipulation and coercion to perform a physical act on a child without parental consent and against the child's expressed wishes, that crosses the line from a prank into criminal behavior. The fact that the perpetrator is a family member doesn't change the legal reality. I understand this is difficult, but if you want to file a formal report, I can send an officer to your home tomorrow to take your statement and photograph your son as evidence." I sat there in my kitchen, holding the phone, realizing that this decision would change my life forever. Filing a police report against my uncle would make me a pariah in my family. They would say I was vindictive, cruel, that I was taking things too far, that I was destroying lives over a haircut. But staying silent would teach Oliver that adults can violate his boundaries without consequences, and I wasn't willing to send that message. I made the appointment for the next morning, and then I did something else I never thought I would do. I called a lawyer. My friend Rachel had given me the name of a family law attorney who specialized in cases involving child welfare, and even though it was late in the evening, I left a detailed voicemail explaining my situation and asking for a consultation. I couldn't sleep that night, tossing and turning, imagining all the ways this could go wrong. What if the police didn't take me seriously? What if my family turned against me completely? What if pursuing this actually made things harder for Oliver instead of better? But every time I started to doubt myself, I thought about Frank's smug face and his complete refusal to acknowledge that he had done anything wrong, and I knew I was making the right choice. The next morning, 2 officers came to our home and spent over an hour taking my statement, interviewing Oliver in a gentle, age-appropriate way, and taking photographs of his shaved head as evidence. Oliver was scared and confused about why police were involved, and I had to explain to him that sometimes when adults hurt children, even adults in our family, there need to be consequences to make sure it doesn't happen again. The lawyer called me back that afternoon and confirmed what Detective Martinez had said. Frank's actions could potentially be prosecuted as assault on a minor, and at minimum, I had grounds for a restraining order to keep him away from Oliver. She also warned me that pursuing legal action against a family member would be emotionally devastating, and that my family would likely fight me every step of the way, trying to pressure me into dropping the charges. "Are you prepared for that?" she asked. I looked at Oliver, who was sitting on the couch hugging his knees to his chest, still traumatized by what had happened, And I said, "Yes, I'm ready to fight for as long as it takes." What happened over the next few weeks would test me in ways I never imagined, but I had finally found my strength, and I wasn't backing down for anyone. The phone calls and messages from my family went from pleading to angry within 48 hours of me filing the police report. My mother called me sobbing, saying I had betrayed the family and that she couldn't believe her own daughter would involve the police over something so trivial. My sister sent me a long, hateful text message calling me vindictive, saying I was using Oliver as a weapon to get revenge on Frank for some imagined slight, and that I was tearing the family apart out of pure spite. Even cousins I hadn't spoken to in years were suddenly reaching out, all saying the same thing. I was overreacting, I was being cruel, and I needed to drop the charges immediately before I did irreparable damage to the family. Have you ever done the right thing and had everyone you love tell you that you're wrong? If you're going through something similar right now, please hit that subscribe button and like this video, because I want you to know that standing alone doesn't mean you're wrong, and I'm going to show you how I survived this storm. My father, who had stayed mostly silent during the confrontation at the lake house, finally called me 3 days after I filed the report. "Ashley, I'm disappointed in you," he said, his voice cold in a way I had never heard before. "Frank made a mistake, yes, but you're destroying this family over it. Your mother is having anxiety attacks, your sister won't speak to anyone, and Frank is telling everyone you're trying to ruin his reputation and get him arrested. Is this really the example you want to set for Oliver? That when someone in the family makes a mistake, you punish them as harshly as possible instead of showing forgiveness and grace?" I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. My own father, who I had always believed would protect me, was asking me to show grace to the man who had traumatized his grandson. The worst part was how they tried to turn Oliver into the bad guy. My sister called and said that Oliver was obviously fine, and that kids forget things quickly, so I was using his temporary upset to justify my vendetta. My mother sent me articles about the importance of forgiveness and family unity, with little notes saying, "I hope you'll read this and reconsider what you're doing to all of us." Frank himself sent me an email that was so manipulative it made me sick. He wrote that he was deeply sorry that his attempt to bond with Oliver had been misunderstood, and that he was shocked and hurt that I would attack him legally instead of handling this within the family like mature adults. He ended the email by saying he was considering suing me for defamation and emotional distress if I didn't drop the charges immediately. Every single message was designed to make me feel guilty, to make me doubt myself, to make me back down. But something had changed in me that I didn't fully understand until that moment. For the first time in my life, I could see their manipulation tactics clearly instead of being controlled by them. I could see how they were prioritizing Frank's comfort over Oliver's trauma, how they were reframing my protection of my son as an attack on the family, and how they were using guilt and fear to try to silence me. I realized that this wasn't really about the haircut anymore. This was about a family system that had been broken for decades, where certain people got to hurt others without consequences, and where victims were expected to stay silent to maintain false harmony. I wasn't just fighting for Oliver anymore. I was fighting to break a generational cycle of enabling and abuse. I sent one message to my entire family, a group text that I had carefully written and rewritten a dozen times. "I understand that my decision to file a police report has upset all of you, but I need you to understand something. Frank manipulated, coerced, and physically altered my child without consent. Oliver explicitly asked him to stop, and Frank ignored him. That is not a mistake. That is not a prank. And that is not something I will ever accept or forgive. If you choose to support Frank instead of Oliver, that is your decision, but it tells me everything I need to know about your priorities. I will not be responding to any more messages asking me to drop this case. My loyalty is to my son, not to protecting adults who harm children." I hit send before I could second-guess myself, and then I blocked most of their numbers. The silence that followed was both terrifying and liberating, and I knew that the next phase of this battle would test me in ways I couldn't even imagine yet. But I also knew that I had finally become the mother Oliver deserved, and nothing my family said or did could make me regret that. The weeks that followed my decision to pursue legal action were the hardest of my entire life. I had never felt so alone, so doubted, so attacked from all sides. My family had essentially disowned me, spreading rumors in our small community that I was mentally unstable and using my son to get attention. I lost friends who decided they didn't want to get involved in family drama, and who quietly stopped returning my calls. Oliver was struggling too, asking me constantly why Grandma and Grandpa didn't call anymore, why we couldn't go to family dinners, why everyone was so angry at us. I had to explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes doing the right thing means standing alone, and watching him try to process that broke my heart into even smaller pieces than it already was. But something unexpected started happening as I fought this battle. I started finding my voice in other areas of my life too. For years, I had been a people pleaser, always saying yes when I wanted to say no, always putting everyone else's needs before my own, always trying to keep the peace even when it hurt me. Standing up to my entire family had shown me that I was capable of setting boundaries and enforcing them, even when it was uncomfortable. I started saying no to my boss when he asked me to work unpaid overtime. I started speaking up in meetings instead of staying quiet. I started asking for what I needed instead of hoping someone would notice and offer it. It was like filing that police report had unlocked something in me that had been dormant my entire life, the ability to advocate for myself. I also started going to therapy, something I had always thought was for people with real problems, but that I now realized I desperately needed. My therapist helped me understand that I had been raised in a dysfunctional family system, where my role was to be the peacekeeper, the one who absorbed everyone else's dysfunction so they didn't have to deal with consequences. She helped me see that my mother's anxiety attacks and my sister's anger were not my responsibility, and that I hadn't destroyed the family by speaking up about abuse. The family had been broken long before I said anything. I had just been the first person willing to admit it out loud. Those therapy sessions gave me tools to process my grief over losing my family, while also validating that I had made the right choice for Oliver. Oliver started therapy too, and watching him slowly heal was the most beautiful and painful thing I had ever experienced. His therapist worked with him on understanding bodily autonomy, on knowing that he had the right to say no even to adults he loved, and on processing the trauma of what Frank had done to him. Some days were good, where Oliver would laugh and play and seem like his old self. Other days were hard, where he would cry and ask why Uncle Frank had hurt him, or why the family had chosen Frank over us. But gradually, slowly, I could see him becoming stronger and more confident. He started looking at himself in the mirror again without shame. He started talking about the incident without breaking down. And one day, he looked at me and said, "Mom, thank you for believing me and protecting me." That moment made every hard day, every lost relationship, every sleepless night worth it. The legal case moved forward despite my family's attempts to pressure me into dropping it. Frank was ultimately charged with assault on a minor, and while he avoided jail time due to his age and lack of prior record, he was given probation, ordered to attend anger management classes, and legally barred from contacting Oliver without my written permission. My family was furious about the outcome, sending me messages saying I had won and destroyed Frank's life over nothing. But I didn't feel like I had won anything. I had lost my entire extended family, my support system, my sense of belonging. What I had gained, though, was something more valuable: my integrity, my voice, and the knowledge that I would always choose protecting my child over being liked or accepted. The journey of overcoming wasn't a straight line with a happy ending. It was messy, painful, and ongoing. But it was also the most important thing I had ever done, and it taught me lessons about strength, boundaries, and self-worth that I would carry with me for the rest of my life. What happened next would challenge me even further, but I was ready because I had finally learned who I really was underneath all those years of people-pleasing and silence. I want to talk about something that I think needs to be said loud and clear, because I've had a lot of time to think about this whole situation and what it really means. The word prank has become a shield that people use to excuse cruel behavior, and we as a society have become way too comfortable accepting that excuse. A real prank is something where everyone, including the target, can laugh about it afterward. A real prank doesn't involve violating someone's body, manipulating them into compliance, or causing them genuine distress and humiliation. What Frank did to Oliver was not a prank, and the fact that he and my family kept using that word to describe it shows how deep the problem really goes. Have you ever had someone hurt you and then tell you it was just a joke when you got upset? If that's happened to you, please subscribe and like this video, because we need to talk about why this language is so dangerous and how it protects abusers while silencing victims. The "it was just a prank" defense is psychological manipulation at its finest. It puts the burden on the victim to prove that their hurt is legitimate, while giving the perpetrator an easy out that requires no accountability or change in behavior. When Frank said it was a prank, what he was really saying was, "My amusement matters more than your pain, and you're wrong for not finding this funny." When my family accepted that framing, they were agreeing with him that Oliver's feelings were less important than avoiding the discomfort of holding Frank accountable. This dynamic plays out in families, schools, workplaces, and relationships every single day. Someone crosses a line, causes harm, and then hides behind, "I was just joking," or "it was just a prank," or "you're too sensitive to avoid taking responsibility for their actions." What makes this even more dangerous is when it happens to children, because children are still learning what's acceptable and what their rights are. When an adult violates a child's boundaries and then tells them it was just a prank or just a joke, that child learns several horrible lessons. They learn that their discomfort doesn't matter. They learn that adults can do whatever they want to their bodies and they have no right to protest. They learn that speaking up about mistreatment makes them the problem, not the person who mistreated them. They learn to doubt their own perceptions and feelings. These lessons follow children into adulthood, creating people who struggle to set boundaries, who stay in abusive relationships, who let others walk all over them, because they were trained from a young age that their feelings are less important than other people's comfort or amusement. Looking back, I can see so many instances in my own childhood where I was taught to accept pranks and jokes that were actually forms of control and cruelty. The uncle who would tickle me until I couldn't breathe, and then call me dramatic when I got upset. The cousin who would hide my belongings and laugh at me searching for them, telling me to lighten up when I cried. The grandmother who would make cruel comments about my weight or appearance and then say, "I'm just teasing," when I looked hurt. All of these incidents taught me that my feelings were negotiable, that other people got to define my reality, and that objecting to mistreatment made me the problem. It took my son being victimized by the same system for me to finally see it clearly and say enough is enough. Breaking that pattern was the hardest and most important thing I've ever done. If you take nothing else from my story, please understand this. You have the right to decide what happens to your body and your children's bodies, regardless of someone's intentions or their relationship to you. You have the right to say, "That hurt me," even if the other person insists they were just joking. You have the right to set boundaries with family members who repeatedly cross lines and then hide behind humor or tradition. And you have the right to protect your children from anyone, including relatives, who makes them uncomfortable or violates their autonomy. Stop accepting "it was just a prank" as a valid excuse for harmful behavior. Start asking yourself, who is this excuse protecting, and who is it harming? Once you can answer that question honestly, you'll know exactly what you need to do, even if it's the hardest thing you've ever had to face. The woman I am today is completely different from the woman I was when we arrived at that lake house for what I thought would be a peaceful family vacation. Back then, I was a people pleaser who would bend over backward to avoid conflict, who valued being liked more than being respected, and who had never truly stood up for anything in my life. I had spent 34 years believing that keeping the peace was the same thing as being a good person, that family loyalty meant accepting bad behavior without complaint, and that my role was to smooth over problems rather than address them directly. The old Ashley would have swallowed her anger about what Frank did, accepted his half-hearted apology, and spent years in therapy trying to process why she felt so angry and powerless. But something fundamental shifted in me when I saw my son's face that morning, and I became someone I didn't fully recognize but that I'm incredibly proud of. The transformation wasn't easy or comfortable, and there were many days when I wanted to go back to being the person I was before because it was so much easier to live in denial. Standing up for what's right is exhausting. It means losing relationships, being misunderstood, facing constant criticism, and questioning yourself 100 times a day. It means lying awake at night wondering if you're doing the right thing, if you're being too harsh, if maybe everyone else is right and you're wrong. But it also means looking at yourself in the mirror and knowing that you have integrity, that you didn't compromise your values for comfort or acceptance, and that you taught your child through your actions what it means to have a backbone. The old Ashley wanted everyone to like her. The new Ashley wanted to be able to respect herself, and that required a complete rewiring of my priorities. One of the biggest changes was learning to trust my own instincts instead of constantly seeking external validation. Before this happened, I would second-guess every decision, always asking friends and family what they thought I should do because I didn't trust my own judgment. Now, I've learned that I know what's right for my child better than anyone else, and I don't need a committee to approve my parenting decisions. When my gut tells me something is wrong, I listen to it instead of letting other people talk me out of what I'm feeling. This shift has affected every area of my life. I left a job where I was undervalued and found one that respects my skills and boundaries. I ended friendships that were one-sided and draining. I started dating someone who treats me as an equal partner instead of trying to control or diminish me. All of these changes stemmed from that one moment when I chose to believe myself over my entire family. I also learned the difference between being alone and being lonely. For months after I cut off contact with most of my family, I felt incredibly isolated. I missed the Sunday dinners, the holiday gatherings, the sense of belonging to something bigger than myself. But I gradually realized that I had never truly belonged in that family system because belonging required me to be silent, compliant, and willing to accept mistreatment. I was alone now, but I was free. I could be authentic. I could set boundaries. I could live according to my own values instead of constantly trying to mold myself into what others wanted me to be. And once I accepted that truth, I started building a new chosen family of people who valued honesty, integrity, and mutual respect. These relationships are deeper and more genuine than anything I had with my biological family, because they're based on who I really am, rather than the role I was assigned at birth. The most powerful part of this transformation has been watching how it's affected Oliver. He's now 10 years old, and he's one of the most confident, self-assured kids I've ever met. He knows how to set boundaries. He speaks up when something bothers him. He doesn't accept mistreatment just because it comes from an authority figure. He understands that love should never require you to accept harm or stay silent about injustice. I look at him, and I see the child I wish I had been, the child I could have been if someone had protected me the way I protected him. Breaking the cycle of dysfunction in my family means that Oliver will grow up with a completely different foundation than I had, and that is worth every relationship I lost, every hard day I endured, and every moment of doubt I pushed through. I'm not the same person I was 2 years ago, and I wouldn't go back to being her for anything in the world. The journey of transformation is ongoing, but I finally know who I am, what I stand for, and what I'm willing to fight for, and that knowledge is the most valuable thing I've ever gained. So here we are, 2 years after that horrible morning at the lake house, and I need to tell you the most important lesson I learned from all of this. Setting boundaries with family is one of the hardest things you'll ever do, but it's also one of the most important. We're taught from birth that family is everything, that blood is thicker than water, that you should forgive family members no matter what they do because they're family. But that belief system protects abusers and traps victims in cycles of dysfunction that can last for generations. The truth that nobody wants to say out loud is this: being related to someone doesn't give them the right to hurt you or your children, and protecting your child is always more important than maintaining family harmony. If you're struggling with this right now, if you're torn between protecting someone you love and keeping the peace with your family, please hit that subscribe button and like this video, because I want you to hear this. Choosing your child is always the right choice, even when everyone tells you you're wrong. I spent so many months replaying that morning in my mind, wondering if I could have handled it differently, if there was some way I could have protected Oliver while also keeping my family intact. But the truth is that my family was already broken. It was broken by years of enabling Frank's bad behavior, by a system that valued comfort over truth, and by everyone's willingness to sacrifice victims to avoid confronting uncomfortable realities. I didn't break my family by speaking up about what Frank did. I just refused to continue pretending that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. And yes, that refusal cost me relationships, caused me pain, and made my life harder in many ways. But it also freed me from a toxic system that was never going to change, and it gave Oliver a chance to grow up knowing that his worth isn't negotiable and his boundaries matter. The hardest part of this journey has been accepting that some relationships aren't worth saving, even when those relationships are with people you've loved your entire life. My mother still sends me occasional messages asking when I'm going to get over this and let the family reunite. My sister posted on social media about how some people hold grudges forever and use their children as weapons. Frank himself sent me a Christmas card last year as if nothing had ever happened, with a note saying he hoped we could move past our disagreement. Each of these attempts to reconnect comes with the same underlying message. If I would just forget what happened and stop making such a big deal out of it, everything could go back to normal. But going back to normal would mean teaching Oliver that his trauma doesn't matter, that adults can violate him without consequences, and that keeping the peace is more important than protecting yourself. I'm not willing to send those messages, so those relationships remain broken, and I've had to grieve the family I thought I had while building a new life without them. But here's what I want you to understand about that grief. It's real, it's valid, and it doesn't mean you made the wrong choice. I still miss my parents sometimes. I still wish my sister would wake up and realize that she chose the wrong side. I still feel sad when holidays come around and we're not invited to family gatherings. Doing the right thing doesn't magically make the pain go away, or give you a happy ending where everyone apologizes and recognizes that you were right all along. Sometimes doing the right thing just means living with the consequences of other people's choices, while knowing that you protected what mattered most. Oliver is thriving now, and he knows without a doubt that I will always choose him over anyone else, including my own family. That knowledge has given him a foundation of security and self-worth that will serve him for the rest of his life. That's my happy ending, even if it doesn't look like the fairy tale I once imagined. If you're in a situation right now where you're being pressured to accept abuse or mistreatment from family members, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not obligated to maintain relationships with people who hurt you, manipulate you, or refuse to respect your boundaries. You are not selfish for protecting your children, even when that protection requires you to go against your entire family. You are not wrong for trusting your instincts when they tell you something isn't right, even when everyone around you says you're overreacting. The people who truly love you will respect your boundaries and support your decisions, even when they don't fully understand them. The people who attack you, guilt you, or try to manipulate you into silence are showing you exactly who they are, and you need to believe them. My only regret about this entire situation is that I didn't act sooner, that I spent so many years doubting myself and prioritizing other people's comfort over my own truth. Don't make that same mistake. Trust yourself, protect your children, and never apologize for having standards and boundaries, even when standing by them costs you everything. We've come to the end of my story, but I hope this is just the beginning of your journey toward finding your voice and protecting what matters most. After hearing everything I went through, I want to ask you something. What would you have done in my place? Would you have filed the police report, or would you have tried to handle it within the family? Do you think I went too far, or do you think I should have done more? Leave your thoughts in the comments below because I genuinely want to hear from you, and I want this to be a space where we can have honest conversations about family dysfunction, boundaries, and protecting our children. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because I'm going to keep sharing stories like this. Stories about standing up to injustice even when it's hard, and I want you to be part of this community we're building. I also want to say something to those of you who are currently in situations similar to what I went through. Maybe you have a family member who constantly crosses boundaries and everyone expects you to just accept it. Maybe someone hurt your child and your family is pressuring you to let it go. Maybe you're being told you're too sensitive, too dramatic, too unforgiving, and you're starting to believe them. If that's you, I need you to know that you're not crazy, you're not wrong, and you deserve support. There are resources available to help you. Talk to a therapist who specializes in family trauma. Reach out to support groups for parents dealing with similar situations. Consult with a lawyer if you're considering legal action. And most importantly, trust yourself. Your instincts are telling you something is wrong for a reason, and you don't need anyone's permission to protect yourself or your children. One question I get asked a lot is whether I believe revenge or justice ever truly brings peace, or if it just feeds more anger and keeps us stuck in the past. That's a complicated question, and I think the answer is different for everyone. For me, pursuing legal action against Frank wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability, consequences, and making sure he understood that what he did was serious and unacceptable. Did it bring me peace? Not in the way I expected. I still carry anger about what happened, and I still grieve the family relationships I lost. But I also have a different kind of peace that comes from knowing I didn't betray myself or my son, that I stood up for what was right even when it was hard, and that I broke a cycle that could have continued for generations. So no, justice didn't erase my pain or magically fix everything, but it did give me the ability to look at myself in the mirror with respect, and that's worth more than I can put into words. I want to encourage you to take what you've learned from my story and apply it to your own life immediately. Think about your relationships right now. Are there people in your life who consistently cross your boundaries and then make you feel guilty for being upset? Are there family dynamics that make you uncomfortable, but you've never said anything because you don't want to cause problems? Are there situations where you've prioritized keeping the peace over protecting yourself or your children? If you answered yes to any of those questions, I want you to start having the hard conversations, start setting boundaries, start saying no. Start trusting yourself more than you trust other people's opinions of you. It won't be easy, and people will push back, but your freedom and peace of mind are worth fighting for. Before I let you go, I want to tell you about the next video I'm working on. It's going to be about how to identify emotional abuse within families, because I've realized that so many people don't even recognize they're being abused because it's been normalized for their entire lives. I'm going to share the red flags I missed, the patterns I finally learned to recognize, and practical strategies for dealing with family members who use guilt, manipulation, and gaslighting to control you. If that sounds like something you need to hear, make absolutely sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on so you don't miss it. Thank you so much for listening to my story, for being part of this community, and for having the courage to face these difficult topics. Remember, protecting your children and standing up for what's right is never wrong, no matter how many people try to convince you otherwise. I'll see you in the next video, and until then, stay strong, trust yourself, and never apologize for having boundaries.